Welcome to Pennsylvania in Focus. I'm Eliana Kernodle. Pennsylvania's U.S. Senate race is heading towards a recount. Joining me with more on this story is the Center Square's Pennsylvania editor, Kristen Smith. Kristen, where does this race stand?
Right now, we're 30,000 votes between Dave McCormick and Bob Casey. Bob Casey is, of course, the incumbent Democrat senator. He was hoping to go back to Washington for a third term, but Dave McCormick, who is a former hedge fund CEO manager, has managed to get about 30,000 more votes than Casey this time around. Election workers have been counting for 9 days. It's been an exceptionally close race. They are about 0.45 percentage points apart. And although the AP and multiple media outlets have called the race for McCormick based on their own internal mathematics, Casey will not concede, and he has exercised his right to an automatic recount, which happens under state law when the outcome is either 0.5 and below percentage points. So they're just within that margin. So a recount is likely to start within the next few days. Counties will have until November 26th to finish, and then November 27th to tell the state.
And there's a bit of a controversy over some ballots. What's the story there?
Sure. So we still have outstanding provisional ballots, overseas ballots, and some mail-in and absentee ballots. Now, in that latter category, the mail-in and absentee ballots, there's a group of them, about 1,500 that are set aside and not being counted because either they're misdated or not dated at all, or they're missing the secrecy envelope. Then there's another couple thousand across the state that are not being counted because they are allegedly cast by people who are not registered voters. This is something that was caught by election workers. It's on them to verify the validity of each ballot to make sure that they're signed correctly to the appropriate voter, that they're dated correctly. And so these ballots under state law, if you find these errors, they have to be set aside. So that's what's happening here. And the McCormick campaign has legally challenged those as he is able to do. Then you have provisional ballots that are often filed in the case of voters who maybe never got their mail-in ballot and needed to come in on election day to the polling place and fill one out, and other curing issues like that. So those are still being hand counted in a number of counties. And then, of course, overseas military ballots speak for themselves. And so the State Department estimated as of Tuesday that there was roughly altogether 80,000 of these votes left. But mathematically speaking, and coming directly from the McCormick campaign itself, and of course backed by other media outlets, there is just not enough probable votes for Casey in order for him to make up this 30,000 vote gap. Now, you may be wondering, 80,000 votes is a lot more than 30,000. But Casey's not going to get every single one of those votes. And McCormick has gained on him in deep blue counties by a significant amount. Now, Casey still won in those counties, but McCormick really closed the gap between those. And because of that, his overall vote count continues to exceed what Casey is getting. And so that trend is going to continue, they say, with these provisional ballots and overseas ballots. Something like more than 2/3 of those ballots would Casey have to win in order to overcome McCormick. And so, you would be looking for those votes in places like Philadelphia, in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County, some of the collar counties around Philadelphia. And the McCormick campaign said on Thursday morning that all of the ballots, aside from the ones that are currently invalid, have been counted in Philadelphia. So there's no more coming from there, and he's still 30,000 down.
So how much does a recount cost, and what has been kind of the history of recounts in Pennsylvania?
Sure. So the State Department is estimating that this will cost taxpayers $1 million. And we've had the automatic recount provision in election law since roughly 2004. Since then, there's been 8 contests that have been eligible for the recount, but the candidate that is losing in those contests can either opt into the recount or not. So in 4 of those, that candidate chose not to have the recount. Now, the other 4, they did have the recount, and none of those results were overturned. They all stood as they were called on election day or in the few days after. What's interesting is that one of those recounts is actually the 2022 Republican primary for a U.S. Senate seat that Dr. Oz actually won, but Dave McCormick was narrowly behind him. And in fact, they were again within, half a percentage point. And so McCormick exercised his right for a recount in that case. He lost. Then Dr. Oz went on to face John Fetterman. Fetterman beat him handily by like 5 points. Now he's in Washington, and feasibly, even after this recount that should be over by, Black Friday, the end of this month, McCormick will still be in Washington, where he was earlier this week for Senate orientation.
Well, Kristen, thank you for your insights on this story. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com.